Let's talk to Helen Dale. Helen, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm very well indeed, very well indeed. Amused by a few things this week, not least the people getting their knickers in a twist about the Union Jack being flown from government buildings. You know, I was listening to an interview on another radio station this morning where the presenter said, well, you know, some people are quite concerned about this. And it's like, well, who's concerned about it? Nobody's concerned about it. Most people think it's quite a good idea. Let's get on with it.
Probably found 3 tweets.
Yes, but this is the trouble, isn't it, with the media these days? They try to reflect their own views because they're all sort of middle-class champagne socialists, and they think, oh, this is all a bit horrible. It's all a bit sort of, you know, it's like the Nazis, you know, they're all flying flags. No, it isn't like that. It's actually a perfectly sensible thing to do. I know this is not what we were going to talk about, but it's part of this whole nationalism thing where some people think being nationalistic is in some way wrong. I don't think it's wrong to be nationalist. I think it's rather a good thing.
Well, there's good and bad ways to do nationalism. And and federalism, I have to say.
Yes.
And at the moment, the European Union is doing both nationalism and federalism badly.
Yes, very badly.
I mean, I've been focusing when I've been talking on your show in the last couple of weeks on sort of criminal matters and sentencing and the Sarah Everard case and so on and so forth. And I will go back to that. I've got a big piece coming out next week on it. But I have been watching in growing alarm at the behaviour of the European Union, the behaviour of figures in the Commission, and also individual EU leaders. Macron has been the worst offender, but quite a lot of the others have been very bad as well. And the reason it's alarmed me is, I mean, you probably recall the lead up to the referendum in 2016. We all recall the how feral public debate in this country got, particularly in 2019, as Brexit approached and so on and so forth. And we also, both Leavers and Remainers, became familiar with nutters, not only on the other side, but on their own side.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, nutters are a thing, and people who just went off the reservation, and without naming any, I will name one Remainer because he's become notorious, and that's AC Grayling.
Yes.
He really has reached comical alley levels of denial.
Although I have to say, Lord Adonis joins them this week because we put him on Plank of the Week because he actually put out a tweet at the weekend in which he said it's becoming more and more clear that Brexit will be reversed. And I just went,
I know,
actually, it's not more and more clear that that's going to happen at all to anyone but you.
At all. But no, I mean, I've seen Grayling's comments along the lines of, oh, there's no problems with the EU vaccine rollout. And I mean, I've just got the mental image of the Iraqi guy, Baghdad Bob, you know, comical Alec, the entire of Baghdad burning down behind him, you know, nothing to see.
And the tanks actually coming behind him, as he said, the tanks are not here, right?
And the tanks coming down the main drag, that kind of thing. But the point is, we all learnt that, you know, I mean, I'm the sort of leaver where people did struggle to work out what my views were because I was committed and I wrote so much about Brexit for lots of different outlets all across the political spectrum that people couldn't tell what my politics were. And so I got accused, obviously, of being a leaver because I occasionally retweeted Conservative Party stuff or Brexit Party stuff, but also of being a Remainer because of my journalism.
Right.
So if you'd have come to me in 2019 or in 2016 to think of the 2 years when this was at its most fervid, and you were a Leave supporter, a fellow Leave supporter, and said that the broad swathes of the European Commission, as well as individual leaders across the European Union, would turn it into a bunch of anti-vaxxers. If you'd have said that to me, I would have not wanted you on my team, on the Leave team. Yeah. I know that's kind of sporting shorthand, but I would not have wanted you to be trying to argue for the position that I endorsed because it would have struck me as the Leave version of someone like Grayling or Adonis being completely bonkers and detached from reality.
Exactly. There was a lot of that. There was a lot of that, but more of it was on the Remain side, I'd have to say.
Yes, it was.
Because the warnings of the terrible things that were going to happen, you know, and of course
every time
they
really said that.
They really did, and every time it didn't happen, they said, oh, well, that's because we haven't left yet, or that's because, you know, this hasn't happened yet. But it will happen, and still we wait, and still it hasn't happened.
No, but the point is we have people on the side of both Leave and Remain who are sensible, have learnt to spot nutters. And the problem with the anti-vax nonsense, particularly from Macron, but also from within the Commission as well, is it's bonkers. And you've got this situation where even in your wildest dreams, did you have the European Union turns into a bunch of anti-vaxxers on your vote leave Brexit bingo card? Because I certainly didn't.
I don't think anybody did. But I mean, look at this from last night. Right? Nick Dubois actually tweeted this out. I retweeted it earlier. The EU steering board on vaccines could not agree by Wednesday evening on a new distribution mechanism for the 10 million additional Pfizer doses that the Commission recently secured as a result of sped up production. So they're still leaving most of this stuff. They may have the vaccine, but most of it is sitting in a warehouse or in a fridge somewhere because they can't decide on who to give it to.
And not only that, you've just got this classic case. The European Union looks now like we did when we were having the PPE and the care home fiascos. Where you've got this right hand and left hand simply not knowing what the other is doing. Because where the police conducted that raid on an AstraZeneca factory in Italy, or warehouse actually, and they were saying, we were worried that these vaccines were going to go to the UK. I went digging on that because I can read Italian, and I had a good old dig. And no, it's worse than that. Not only were those vaccines packed up and not ready to go to the UK, a small number were to go to other EU countries like Belgium, I think was the one that I read, but the majority were for the COVAX scheme. Now, the COVAX scheme is what AstraZeneca and Oxford worked out to ensure that developing countries get vaccinated without having to pay through the nose for it.
Right.
I mean, this has been an ongoing problem with medical developments in Western countries, where Big Pharma, for want of a better word, you can't really blame them for doing this, wants to make money out of their new innovation, their invention. That's great. That's fine. And very honourably, Oxford University and AstraZeneca made a decision not to do that, to ensure that developing countries could be vaccinated. And that goes under the general name of the COVAX scheme, COVAX. And so all those vaccines that were impounded were going to poor countries.
And that's precisely...
I just find this staggering. I just cannot believe the level of nonsense that is going on here. I mean, you talked about nationalism at the beginning of the show. I mean, this is genuine vaccine nationalism.
Yeah, it is.
And it's not, that's the thinking, but the problem with it is the extraordinarily incompetent execution.
And also, let's not forget,
whole thing.
But let's not forget, Helen, that the extraordinary incompetence didn't start after the vaccine was made. It began long before the vaccine was actually available, because it was the inability of the EU to organise itself and to organise its procurement process, which is why they were so far behind.
Well, this is the problem is, you've been talking about, the European Union countries have been talking about wanting to end vaccine exports to various countries, and they've done it particularly to Australia. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, because I've been catching up on the Australian end of it as well. And they keep using the word reciprocity. Now, this is not based on any legal restrictions on exports from the UK, but rather on equivalent measures. Now, this is a familiar phrase to anyone who's ever studied European Union law. What equivalent measures usually refers to, though, in EU law is technical non-tariff barriers to trade, like product standards. Your classic way of, we can't have that, it's got a widget in the wrong place. Right. But here, they're using it to refer to the way that the UK government's contracts with AstraZeneca and other suppliers have been drafted. Now, all of the plants which have been set up to produce vaccines in the UK were tailored to a large extent to meet the needs of contracts the UK government had signed. If it were not for those contracts, they would not exist in their current form. And much of this is built on the partnership that already existed between Oxford University and AstraZeneca. Yes, I've been talking to friends from Oxford University. People at the university, a very Remain-focused place, are very, very angry about the way they've been trashed on this.
I'm sure
because they have been doing the right thing from the very beginning, and they do feel that they have been trashed by their friends.
Well, they absolutely have, and I think many people have seen through now what it is that the EU is like, because even those who were kind of, and we've been saying this now for a while, but those who were sort of reluctant leavers, people who probably voted Remain, but kind of just went, well, I suppose it's happening now, we might as well get on with it. They're the
minority, I think.
Yeah, they are the people who are now saying, well, thank goodness we're not there. And in fact, I was listening, I don't know whether you heard the other day, to Mark Dolan's show. He had a German journalist on who's based in London, who this time last year was hoping to be reposted back to Germany because of the way the COVID pandemic was being dealt with over there. She says now she's very glad that she stayed here because now Germany's an absolute chaotic state. They're all arguing amongst themselves. People are accusing Angela Merkel now of politicking, where before she was being treated as if she was some kind of scientific genius leader, you know.
I do think it's important to remember that the bits of the pandemic that Germany and other EU countries, but particularly Germany, managed well were when their own healthcare system was doing the work.
Yes.
And as soon as they booted it upstairs to the Commission, and this is an example of Germany being the good European and booting it up to the Commission, they shouldn't have done it. And I'm sure they realise that now, but it's too late, too late. It's the maiden's cry. The horse is, all the way in the next village now, and you've shut the gate.
Right.
But so they booted it upstairs to the Commission, and particularly to a part of the Commission that hasn't historically been very active. And with the history in European countries that health, and I'm going to use the British term, is devolved to national governments, and so they asked the Commission to do something that it was not fit to do. And it's meant that they just, at very basic levels, they've not understood contractual drafting. They've not understood the most basic principles of how to make arrangements with pharmaceutical companies, how to ensure supply, or even to behave honourably to third countries. Now, and I use third countries in the EU law sense of the term.
Yes.
Now, the vaccines that have been blocked and which have been reported globally all around the world have been mainly to Australia. Now, what the situation in Australia now is, whilst it's still got coronavirus under control because of excellent state capacity and because of the way its quarantine system has worked, is Australia now, which has domestic vaccine manufacturing. There's a company in Australia called Commonwealth Serum Laboratories, which is making the AstraZeneca vaccine for Australians. Now, as we know, it takes a while to scale up vaccine production. It's a tricky exercise, which is something else the European Union didn't appreciate when they were negotiating with this. Now, what it has meant is that the initial batch of vaccines, and they weren't all AstraZeneca, some were Pfizer, that were going to Australia, were meant to, the Pfizer lot, to vaccinate New Zealand and Papua New Guinea, and the AstraZeneca ones just to be a holdover until Australia's domestic production ramped up. Now, as a result of those blockages, not only is Commonwealth Serum Laboratories being forced to work much faster and much harder, and I have friends there now in Australia who are working 16-hour days to get this sorted, but Australia is now having to either pass on any vaccines it had, like Pfizer, to New Zealand, and when they run out, vaccinate the rest of New Zealand. And the other country Australia is having to vaccinate using its domestic production is Papua New Guinea. Is a former Australian colony. So what you've got here, this is what the European Union's vaccine procurement cock-up, excuse my French, has led to.
Yes.
It's not just all this stuff we're seeing in the EU. They've even managed to cause difficulties in one of the very few countries that has managed COVID-19 competently from Two So, I mean, this is
New Zealand had very few cases, didn't they? I mean, you'd wonder.
Yes. New Zealand and Australia were two of the standout countries, and they have to be looked at by people from European countries and the United States for the simple reason that they are Western liberal democracies with Western liberal democratic traditions.
Yes.
Now, South Korea and Japan have become Western liberal democracies, but they did not start that way, and their culture is very different.
Yeah.
Taiwan, likewise, they started as an autocracy. So if you're going to learn about how to do state capacity, and you're a Western liberal democracy, you probably want to look at Australia and New Zealand. So thanks, European Union, for trying to screw the pooch for everybody else on that one.
Well, that's the trouble, isn't it? I mean, the difficulty, of course, with all of this is, let's look back at the European Union, because the question I have for you, Helen, is whether this chaos that they have caused for themselves is something which has not only shown them up to be rather bad at everything, but particularly bad at administering anything to do with, worldwide rollouts of a vaccine or the treatment of a disease, or even public health matters as well. I mean, do they come back from this is the question I've got, because I see this as a watershed moment for the EU, where an awful lot of individual countries will now think about the possibility of leaving.
Well, I don't know. I mean, for the simple reason that there are two things going on here. There's the extraordinary incompetence of the Commission and the anti-vax rhetoric coming from various EU leaders. But underneath that anti-vax rhetoric, and this is one where we do get to say our NHS, or a country like Australia gets to talk about Medicare and that kind of thing, which is the equivalent. There is a strong undercurrent in health practices in many EU countries, but particularly in Germany and France, of pseudoscience. Now, the NHS no longer funds homeopathy, Prince Charles's favourite little thing, to mention a royal. You can still get it funded in Germany. This is pseudoscience. This is based on the idea that water has memory. I mean, if water has memory, Londoners are in trouble.
Quite.
Think about how often the water, 7 times on average. When Sacha Baron Cohen was Ali G, I remember him interviewing, I think he was the chap who was head of the main sewage works crowd. And Ali G's humour was based on the person always knowing the answer to the question he was going to get.
Right.
And he asked this bloke about water and London, and he obviously didn't know that. Sacha Baron Cohen did not know this little bit of information. And when the chap from the mayor's office, or wherever it was when Boris was mayor, it's ages ago, said, oh, no, water is recycled in most Londoners, it goes through you 7 times. And just watching the Ali G face, just...
Right. I know.
He clearly didn't know this.
No, exactly. It is quite remarkable. Well, there's a lot we don't know, lots of known unknowns, lots of unknown unknowns. Thank you very much indeed, Helen Dale, writer, lawyer, political commentator. The EU surely has shot itself not only in the foot here, but very possibly in the head, where it means that they cannot any longer be relied upon to do anything properly. And if you're the governments in either Germany or France or Spain or Italy, it's just not going to be a future conversation that's not going to be had, is it? Who knows what the future is going to be like? But I would imagine, rather like Britain becomes more successful outside of the EU, so too will a lot of other countries. And I think the EU, this is the beginning of the end for them. I don't think there's any doubt about that.